Hi, Giovanna. Welcome back to the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. I can't stop smiling because we were supposed to start recording like 35 minutes ago, but per tradition, we have so much fun catching up and talking. So here we are again
Good
for
sign.
part two.
Thank
Welcome back.
you for having me, Brittany.
It's my pleasure. So, for anyone who is just tuning in, hasn't heard part one yet, if you wouldn't mind, let's do a quick little recap on who is Giovanna. What do you do?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Such a pleasure. Thank you, Brittany, again for having me. So, in a nutshell, essentially, I call myself a human connection and communication expert. And, people always wonder, what does that really mean? And so I always say that the quality of our lives is really based on the quality of our relationships. And this can be both a mix of our personal relationships, so romantic relationships with our partners, our spouse, our wife, girlfriends, dating, even. Personal can also be family, our parents, our children, whatnot. Personal can also be your neighbors, or it can be a complete stranger that you meet, or your hairdresser. These are all more personal relationships. But then we also have our professional relationships. And this can look like, your boss, your manager, your colleagues, when you go out networking. I'm laughing because I'm sidetracking a little bit, but a good friend of mine told me the other day that when everybody hangs at the elevator and the water cooler, he avoids his colleagues. So this would be an example of fixing or working on your professional relationships. When you're
Yeah.
avoiding them, there's an issue. So in a nutshell, the quality of our life really is based on the quality of our relationships. And that does include both our professional and our personal relationships. And the moment we wake up in the day, we're having a personal relationship with ourselves. And that relationship with self now goes out into the world and has a slew of different types of relationships with other people. And so, how can we have beautiful relationships, successful ones, meaningful ones, deep, connected, authentic ones, if we don't even have a good one with ourselves first and foremost? And if we also don't know how to communicate with these people in our lives? So, this is what I teach. How do we really start to have a healthy, meaningful relationship with self? How do we understand ourselves better? And then, how do we go out and actually consciously communicate with the people in our lives so that way we can have powerful, meaningful relationships with those people as well?
Beautifully said. And I'm not sure if you can hear, but there is a leaf blower right outside my window right now. So if that ever becomes too noisy, please let me know. Oh gosh.
I don't think.
Okay, I might just pause for a little bit until they walk past. They've been doing lawn work in our community since 7:30 this morning. And
That's
it
always
just so happened that right before, I mean 5 minutes before we started talking at 2, they started mowing our yard and being in front of our yard. And then they go through like 3 times because they come after the mower, they come with a weed whacker. And then after that, they come with a leaf blower to blow off the weed whackings. So,
sounds like the construction that is outside of my house at the best of times. So
yeah.
I
Yeah.
get it. I don't hear anything though, so that's
Okay, that's good. Awesome. Okay, perfect. Then I will get back on track and hopefully it doesn't distract
I
me
was going to
in
say
the
it's just a
conversation.
distraction on your end, yeah, more
Yeah.
than anything.
Yeah. So in our last conversation together, we really unpacked quite a bit of things. So I want to pick up where we left off and go from there. And then if it ends up that we segue and backtrack and dive more deeply into the elements of your book, we'll do that. But where we left off in our last conversation, and I think it's such a critical, hot topic of conversation for today, especially being in a world that's so polarized where it's us versus them. We were talking about how you can build even deep, strong, meaningful relationships with people that you don't see eye to eye with. And
Mhm.
I think that's really challenging for a lot of people. And especially I think back to the 2020 election in the US. I know people listen all around the world, but how that divided my family. And
Mm,
to watch that happen and to hear people for years say, I love you too. I'll do anything for you. I'll always be there for you until,
mm.
until you see things so differently than I do that I cannot see you as a rational human being who deserves respect and my love and affection.
Yes. I'm smiling because there's just so many things to unpack here from what you said. And I think at the core of all of this is building understanding. And so it's really about asking quality questions as to why someone feels or thinks or supports, a certain party as they do, or a certain ideology that they do, and what about that is important for them. Because I think oftentimes, if we are going to talk politics, often we're born into, certain families, or we're around certain circles of people, or we're in certain financial brackets that naturally have us leaning more towards right or left. And so we often make decisions that don't necessarily come with a deep sense of thought behind it. It's almost like an assumption. Like, of course I would be right, or of course I would be left, rather than why am I that way? And what makes me actually choose this side? And what is it about this person that I support or don't support? If we're talking politics, in general, I think, and this goes back to what I was saying about knowing ourselves first and foremost, really, really deeply, and asking ourselves questions. When we understand why we believe what we believe, why things are important or meaningful to us, why we support democratic versus conservative, is this what it is?
Republican,
Okay.
conservative, either way, it works. Yeah.
then we can start to, so we're unpacking why we support these sides. And when we can really unpack, then we understand deeply what values we have and how they align with certain parties. And so oftentimes when we are fighting on behalf of a certain party, it's really us saying, this is who I identify with. My identity is attached to this. My values are attached to this. And therefore, this must be right. And so people often feel that if you attack their party, then it's you attacking them and their identity and their values and what's most meaningful and important to them. Rather than saying, let's not have this be necessarily personal. This does not have to do with you. Let's understand this. Let's look at the situation from a third person perspective. What is it about the one party that you particularly enjoy, or about the other party that perhaps you feel disappointed about or you don't enjoy? And so we're now starting to unpack those details. Once again, I'm going to reinforce, not just only does this show up in politics, this shows up in literally everything. So let's say you have a conflict with your partner about something, and they so strongly stand behind a certain concept. Maybe one person is Christian and the other person's Muslim, or one person believes in monogamy and the other one believes in polyamory. And so what we do is we give such strong meaning to these concepts, and we attach our identity to those concepts. And so when we become that thing, it's almost like, well, if you're insulting that thing, you must be insulting me. Now it becomes a problem, rather than saying, well, this concept, this idea, this party, this practice is important to me for these reasons. What do you think? And so now that we're having this dialogue and we're unpacking the layers underneath why we support a certain party or have certain ideologies or certain practices, now we can build a deeper sense of understanding of that person and a deeper sense of respect and connection. Mm. We may not, at the end of this conversation, agree still about why that person, votes for who they vote or practices what they practice. But at least we will have a deeper sense of understanding as to why that thing is important for them. What I really want to stress here, though, Brittany, is that in order to have a dialogue like this, It requires two parties to be open to have the dialogue.
Yeah.
In other words, we're not fighting to prove something. We're showing up to unpack our beliefs and share. We're showing up to say, this is what's important for me. It doesn't need to be important for you, but I'll tell you why it's important for me. Not to enforce it on you, to push it on you, to prove something, but just to say, these are all the reasons why I stand behind this, just so that you understand. And that's it. And so to be able to have a beautiful, tennis conversation, a tennis match or a ping pong match where, you're just sharing, the conversation is sort of flowing back and forth. You're saying, okay, this is what's important to me on this side, and that's what's important to me on that side. And this is what's concerning for me on this side, and that's what's concerning for me on that side. That requires a certain level of calmness, certainly, and rational explanation and some sort of knowledge rather than just, well, I believe in them and that's it, case closed.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. One thing I personally would challenge is, instead of looking for things that I agree with on that side by saying, on this side, this is why I identify with this side, getting rid of the sides, because at the end of the day, we all have conservative tendencies and we all have liberal tendencies. It just depends on what context we're referring to. And I think if we can blur those lines in our personal lives and say, I can see that I'm a little bit more conservative in this area, but I'm also very liberal in that area, then it kind of opens that door to exploration instead of defending one side and one's values, right?
I actually love what you said, because I think when you start unpacking the sides and you start talking on a deeper level, which is your values, I think oftentimes people will come to discover that they actually have the same values. And that's really,
it's how do they get there, right? It's how I see the solution to this problem is very different than you. And so I saw something today on a show that I think you're going to really resonate with and love, because where we ended, as we were talking about this, you were also talking about one's own truth, right? And what may be true for one person may not be true for another person. And that's mind-blowing to some people. They're like, no, there is a truth. There is, but it is based on context, right? Yeah. So two people from two different contexts can have two different truths, and both are true based on that context. Totally. And some people still can't wrap their heads around it. So this, what I just saw today, is a beautiful example of this. Okay. Perception.
Yes.
The truth is this lukewarm bowl of water, right? It's neither hot nor cold, and it's sitting in the middle of the table.
Okay.
On one side, someone has their hands in a really hot pot of water.
Yeah.
The other person has it in a really cold pot of water. And then they both move their hands into the center, into the lukewarm. The person whose hand was in the hot water now feels like the water is cold. The person whose hand is in the cold water now feels like the water is warm. Their experience of the exact same thing is very different based on where they just came from.
I think that's a brilliant example.
Isn't that cool?
It is actually, that's a very cool way. Also, because we're on a podcast right now, so it creates a visual for people to imagine without having to necessarily see something to understand this concept.
Which so it's like the truth is the truth. The truth didn't change.
Yeah.
It's your perception of the truth based on where you came from that shifts it.
Entirely. And I think, speaking to this, Brittany, I was having this conversation the other day with someone about equity versus equality. And, so I initially went to school. My first background was in journalism and human rights law. And in human rights, we often looked at, can we live in a world that is equal? And what we came to discover is that everybody enters into this world from a different positioning. We have different class, different race, different sex, different socioeconomic background, different education, different upbringing, different parents. So to assume that we're all starting off from the same footing is entirely unfair and unrealistic. What I want to say about this is that based on all of those differences about where we even start the race, you're going to have an entirely different filter on every single experience that you have, which goes exactly back to this point. If you've got your hand in, cold water first and the other one's got it in hot water, you're starting off from two very different, starting points.
Literally polar opposites. Yeah.
Yeah. And so those starting points change your filter and your perspective on everything that moves forward. And so I think to walk into every conversation with every human being, recognizing that we have different sunglasses on. Yours might be yellow and mine might be red. And therefore, we're going to see the reality in front of us entirely differently. And that's just simply what it is. And so to know that is to then say, okay, I recognize you might be seeing this totally differently than I am. Let me understand how you see it. And let me explain to you how I see it. Therefore, we can both come to find, once again, like you said, this middle ground where we might actually find that there's many similarities in the way we see things, but we might be expressing them quite differently.
Yeah. And back to what you said, attachment to identity inhibits our ability to be understanding, because that means that we have to detach from everything we know as me to step into another person's space. I mean, that it leaves people feeling naked.
Totally.
I mean, literally every belief is like an item of clothes, well, metaphorically speaking, right? And when we take all that off, now we're like, oh my gosh, how can I concentrate on understanding you? I'm worried about being exposed and someone taking off with my clothes. Right? Because if I side with you, then those clothes aren't going to fit me anymore.
Yes. Brilliant what you just said, because, and I think this is really what the fear is, why people fight so strongly for what they believe in, is because they're afraid that if they quote unquote side with you, then they've lost something. And it's not about siding with someone. And it's also not about winning or losing. I remember someone saying years ago, do you want to win or do you want to be happy? And it's such a simple question, but at the end of the day, we can go into a conversation saying, do I want to walk out of this interaction having built deeper understanding of this person and connection? Or do I want to walk out trying to win something and prove something, or being afraid that I'm going to lose because maybe the other side actually has a good point? And it's not winning or losing. It's really about saying, let me be open-minded and flexibly minded enough to hear you out. And I may or may not agree with certain points, and that's okay. And that doesn't make me weaker, and that doesn't make me more vulnerable or naked, as you said. It just makes you actually that much more aware of a bigger picture of things. So now you're not sitting in your blind spot anymore about the other side. You've actually gained a greater sense of awareness.
Yeah.
With all that being said, just to close on this, us humans are meaning-making machines. In other words, we make meaning out of everything. And so we want to give meaning to things. We want to categorize things and, have everything perfectly understood in the box-like form that we put them in. And the more we attach to certain meanings and the more we need something to mean something, and it can only be that way, the more limited we are in terms of seeing the plethora of options and perspectives that are out there.
100%. Yeah. It's like going into a grocery store and them only carrying the brands that you've bought.
Yes.
Nothing else.
Or only going down aisle one always. And
right? It's just like you're limiting yourself. And what you said is so true. It's you are expanding, and I'm going to go back to the metaphor with the clothes. You're not stripping yourself bare because your beliefs were never part of you. That's an illusion, right? What you're really doing is expanding your wardrobe. Doesn't mean you have to wear everything in your closet, but maybe one day you feel like putting on that scarf that you found somewhere, right?
Yes.
Doesn't mean it's going to be permanent. You're not a cartoon character. You don't wear the same thing every day, right? But I think, to the point, context is like the weather. I love metaphors if you can't tell. Context is like the weather. You don't wear the same outfit when the weather changes. If it's freezing outside, you're not wearing a bikini.
Precisely.
You wear that when it's appropriate. That's the way I see my system of beliefs. They serve a purpose for certain contexts, but it doesn't fit every context.
Yes. And I think for us, once again, and we dove a bit into this in the last podcast, the first one we did together, we started talking about my first key that I teach in my program and in my book, which is curiosity. And when we start getting curious about ourselves and really understanding our values, then we can see what is valuable, what is important, what's meaningful to us, and how that can also change over time, and how our predominant values may shift, or how what felt important for us at what point or one stage in our life may not necessarily take priority or be of importance anymore. So to be able to be fluid, even with ourselves, first and foremost, to understand ourselves, but then to be fluid and allow space for change to arrive, because we're constantly changing and evolving the more we learn and grow and expand our vision on things. The more we can be open to seeing other perspectives. And with all that being said, this is not an argument of me saying, you should change the way you vote or start practicing something totally different. Oh, monogamy? No, throw that out the window and start being polyamorous, or vice versa. I'm not suggesting that you just entirely change certain practices or beliefs. What I'm simply suggesting is listen to a variety of different perspectives, because that gives you a greater sense of awareness of the whole experience of a truth.
Yes.
Right? Put your hand in the hot water first, and then in the lukewarm water, and then try it on the other side and put it in the cold water and then in the lukewarm water. Have those two experiences and feel both sides out. That way you can at least know if it resonates, if it's for you, if it aligns on some level or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of your elements or components, which would you prefer? Element, component? How do you define them?
I call them the keys, the 9 keys.
Keys. That's right. Thank you.
They all
Keys.
work.
I was wrong.
All beautiful synonyms.
So then you have 9 keys in the
Yes.
connection code.
Yeah.
So we went over curiosity, but if you wouldn't mind just kind of breaking down each of them and why you chose them, why they're significant.
Certainly. And my brain's like, woo, where do we start? So essentially, I always start off with curiosity. Curiosity being that we need to understand ourselves, ask ourselves questions, understand our needs, our desires, our values, our boundaries, what's important for us, what's not. And when we start getting curious about ourselves, we also gain clarity. And clarity is one of the next keys. And in being curious about self, we gain clarity, which then means that shows up in our communication. So if I understand what I want or what I need, so let's have a very practical example. Couples come to me and they're not pleased in their sex life, and they don't necessarily understand even what they want or they need. They just know they don't feel good. And so the next piece would then be, so we ask ourselves the question, what's really going on? And we can also extend that curiosity to asking our partner questions. What do they like? What do they need? What's important for them? What would be an incredible intimate experience for them? This is just one example of many. So being curious about self, curious about the other person, and really getting into that dialogue and unpacking that. When we get curious, like I said, we become more clear. We also become more conscious. So that really means becoming more aware of what's physically going on, mentally, emotionally, and energetically going on. So physically, does my body feel it's excited, it's responsive, it's enjoying this? Emotionally, do I feel connected? Intellectually, maybe do I feel stimulated? Energetically, do I feel expansive? Right? Are all of these things showing up maybe in an intimate act? Is that what I want? Let me ask my partner. Let me get curious and become aware and conscious of what they want. Then, like I said, we move into clarity, and that means you can communicate clearly what's important for you. Well, I've come to discover from asking myself questions, from becoming more aware of my body's response and my emotions and my thoughts and all these things, that actually what I want, what's become clear for me, is that I like X, or I feel cared for, or I feel safe, or I feel turned on, or I feel whatever it might be that you want to feel when X happens. And so now that's the clarity piece, and that shows up in our communication. Next, I go into confidence. So far we've talked about curiosity, becoming then conscious, getting clear, and then the confidence piece. We need to have a certain sense of confidence and security in ourselves to even be able to communicate these things. If we don't feel secure in, our thoughts, in our feelings, and what's come up for us, we certainly cannot communicate this, especially in an intimate act. Talking about clothes, the earlier metaphors we were using, now we're being literal. Your clothes are off. You're being intimate with a partner. You're being particularly vulnerable in that situation. Once again, this is just an example of many, but you're in an intimate moment. You're in a vulnerable, exposed moment. Do you feel secure enough in yourself to then be able to express what is important for you and what you need? So we get curious, we become conscious, we then become clear, and we communicate that clearly. And with confidence, we then want to communicate that. And then we move into compassion. Can we show empathy? Can we hold space for someone while we're having this conversation? And this once again goes back to the politics piece we were talking about. Can you have a conversation and hold space for that person rather than fighting to be right? Can you listen? Can you aim to understand? Can you aim to see why it's so important or valuable for that person rather than taking it personally and attacking? So, even in a situation in a bedroom with a couple, it could be very easy for one of them to attack and say, no, I didn't do this wrong, or why are you blaming me for this? Or I've been trying so hard to please you, or, whatever that might be, as opposed to saying, let me hear you out and see why this is so important for you and how we can find a solution together to spice things up, to make things more interesting, to find a happy medium for both of us. Right. And that's the compassion piece. We then move into being fully flexible. And this also goes back to the political piece that we talked about. Being fully flexible really is about being open-minded and open-hearted. And it's saying, am I willing to hear what's going on? Am I open enough, receptive enough to hearing what's important and true for you, even though it may not be true for me? And so in being open, you build understanding. And in building understanding, you build empathy and compassion. And in building that, you build a deeper sense of trust and security, which builds confidence. And in building that, we build even more, awareness of who we're with and clarity on what we want. And all of these things start to integrate. So the next piece would then being fully expressed. And so full expression is, can I be vulnerable? Can I be courageous to take the first step and say, this is a really awkward conversation. We're having sex, I'm naked and I'm not pleased, or I'm not satisfied, or I want to initiate sex and I feel my partner doesn't want it, or I'm being rejected, or whatever might be taking place. And that's a matter of saying, can I courageously step in, be vulnerable, be transparent, and really talk about what it is that I need or what it is that I care for that's important for me. And that's the full expression piece. Then we go into flow. And so flow is a combination of things. Flow is a combination of asking quality questions, of actively listening, of what I call soulfully sharing. So really sharing what's important for you deep down. It's also a matter of intuitive insight. And this is really tuning into the subtle elements that come through in a person's communication, but not necessarily verbally. This is the things that you don't say, but your body is saying to me. This is what your facial expressions are telling me. This is what your tone is telling me. And so all of those subtleties actually can allow me to then carry the conversation into a deeper flow state where I can understand you on an even deeper and deeper and deeper level. And flow is really about unpacking the layers of that onion. It's like unraveling them and saying, let's go one layer deeper. Let me ask you another question. Let me actively listen. Let me share some things with you. Let me be insightful and intuitively pick up on all these subtleties that you're sharing with me without it verbally being directly expressed. And so as all those elements are happening, we're unraveling the onion and getting deeper and deeper to the core of that person. And that can be with a complete stranger when we first meet them, getting into those beautiful flow-like conversations that last for hours and you just get lost in time like we do. and it's just so natural. And that can also be conversations with family, with friends, with partners that we've been with for years that, you know, sometimes we think we've known everything about that person. And I would arguably say, if you start to get curious again and ask those quality questions and really listen to that person on all levels, then we're really getting into a whole new depth of who that human is, and that those flow conversations can start to come to life again, which are really beautiful.
That's so much fun. That's happened to me. It's really, no way. Really? I had no clue about that. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, of all the keys, I particularly love flow because it gets us into these flow states. And if we were to actually look at the neuroscience behind it and hook the brain up to seeing what takes place to people when they're in these flow states, particularly in a conversation, it's incredible what parts of the brain get activated that release all these happy hormones, we call it, neurochemicals that really make us actually feel alive. And I think the more we can get into those flow-like conversations with people, the more expansive and loving and fulfilling our relationships feel. And that can happen, like I said, with family we've known for years that we think we already know everything about. And that can also happen with someone you meet for the very first time at a networking event or on a date. And if you know how to get into those flow states, you just want more and more and more. I mean, it's kind of like a drug, but it's a beautiful drug.
Well, I think of some friends I've had, and it's interesting because I see this person one way because that's how we connected. That's what we resonated with. That's why we're friends. And then you meet up at a wedding or a baby shower or a birthday party where they have all of their friends there. And you're like, wow, they're so different than I ever imagined. And then they're sharing things about your friend that you're like, what? Really? I had no clue. Right? It's like, well, I didn't think you would care because you're not into that, you know? And so you start to learn so many other dimensions to those people in your life. So yeah, I love that. That's awesome.
Me too. Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that. And I love that you use the word dimensions because it really is the case. There's so many parts of us, there's so many dimensions within every single individual human being. And once again, going back to the first key, when we really get curious, then we can get into more of these flow states and really understand all these different layers that exist in a human being that can be so fascinating, and that we can learn so much from someone even after years and years of knowing them. The final piece to all of this, I believe I stated 8 of the 9 keys. The final piece to this is integrity. And integrity really is about being in alignment. Are your words in alignment with your actions? Are you consistent? Are you constant? Are you congruent with what you say and what you do? Because the foundation, I cannot stress this the most, the foundation of every single relationship, I don't care who you're with, the person you meet for the very first time or someone you've known for so many years, every single relationship relies on trust. Trust and safety and security. If I can't trust you, if I don't feel safe with you, everything else falls apart. And how do I build a deep sense of trust and security and safety with you? That's from seeing that you are consistent, that you are congruent, that you are in alignment with what you say and what you do. So if I say to you, Brittany, I'm going to be here at 1:00 for our call, my time, then I show up at 1:00 for our call. And now you know you can trust me. It's a little data point, but enough data points will either show you whether you can trust me or not. Now, let's say I've built up enough data points over time that say, I'm consistent, I'm congruent, I'm in integrity, you can count on me, you can rely on me, I'm committed. And maybe there's the off chance that that doesn't happen. That's okay, because you've got enough data to say, okay, something must have gone wrong, something must have happened. I can still trust her, and yet something took place here. But if, on the other hand, there's been enough times where I haven't shown up, or I said I would do something and I don't follow through, or I said that I'd complete a certain task and I don't, or I said I'd be here at 1 and I'm not. Now I'm showing you that you can't rely on me. And if you can't rely on me, there is no safety in this relationship. There is no foundation of trust. And if you don't have that, I mean, good luck to any relationship growing, even just growing. And then from there, maintaining a really strong sense of security and connection.
Mm. So I hope my friend doesn't mind me bringing this up. I don't think it will give anything away. Actually, can I hold that question?
Yes.
I don't have my charger hooked into my laptop. Do you mind if I run and grab that real quick?
As
Okay,
you do
hold
that,
on just a second.
No,
Okay.
no. Okay, go for it.
Thank you. Okay.
The beauty of editing.
Yes. Yes. All right. Okay, I also get out of breath now going up and down steps, even though it's like super early. It's so weird. Maybe I'm just out of shape.
I mean, I also think in general, it's just hormones. It's all hormone shifts. Yeah. I'd be very easy on yourself, because like hormones are such a big thing to unpack. We don't even know the half of how they impact us.
I know, right? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. So hopefully this will be helpful to many people listening, because I think I think a lot of people can resonate with this. So I have a friend who's expecting, and they're really close, semi close with their parents. But it's more so they have to placate to their parents because their parents, they just don't see where they have fault. And anytime they have tried to bring this to their attention, it always starts an argument. It always starts a passive aggressive silent treatment, or, we've done blah, blah, blah for you your whole life. Why are you acting like this? Why are you doing this? And so she's really concerned about how the relationship is going to be when the kid is born, because right now she's got it under control. She's like, I'm good because I just know what buttons not to press. However, when my kid comes into the picture, I have very strong boundaries that I am not willing to let go of. Like, I want my child to be raised in a certain way, and I want that to be respected. So I think about, when you talk about integrity, when you think about, many of these keys that you mentioned, you said it takes two people. But what advice do you have for someone who those other people are never going to be open? Well, I don't want to say never say never, right? But currently are not open to having deep conversation. They only want to have superficial, shallow conversation. It always has to be happy and cheerful. But they take everything personally whenever it is, this is how I want it. We don't want to do it this way.
Yeah, there's a few things that come up for me. So I would actually like to backtrack and simply say it is helpful when two people are open and receptive, and it's not necessary. And I say this because at the end of the day, how we present ourselves and how we show up energetically and emotionally is going to change how you respond to me. What do I mean by this? If I come with a certain sense of tension or anxiety or anger or a sort of sharp tone in my voice, even though it might be entirely subtle, that can be felt on the other side. And so now you're setting up an environment that is going to essentially leave space for the other person to respond in a way that may not necessarily be the best way or the most ideal way that you would like them to. When we make a deeper sense of peace with ourselves, or we show up with more of this peaceful energy, that then gets transferred outwards. Does it always mean that we're going to be met with peace back at us? No, not necessarily, but it certainly helps. I'm also a very big believer in, we could call it planting seeds, but more than just planting seeds, it's really about being very clear, but very calm about what is important and meaningful for us. So rather than showing up and having a tone that looks like blame or disappointment and saying, this is how you've always been, I want it to be different, or you've always treated me this way, can you stop treating me this way? There's a lot of blame and pointing and judgment and just a heaviness around that conversation, versus a conversation that can look like, it can actually look like a much more real, fully expressed, vulnerable conversation that says, I know that we haven't always seen eye to eye, and I know that you believe in certain things and I believe in other things, and those are not necessarily always the same things, or we have different practices. And at this point in my life, I respect who you are and what you do. And I hope, and whether you do or don't, that you respect who I am and what I do. And a part of me is truly afraid that as I'm bringing a kid into this world, that will change this dynamic. And I don't want it to. And I would love, ideally, for us to have this type of relationship. And so now this is sort of the seed planting, or the very clearly expressing what you would ideally like to see. So this is not a blame conversation of you're not being this or you need to be that. It's more like saying, I would love for us to be able to move forwards having a relationship like this. And I understand that we may not always agree with certain things, but I would love for you to know that it's important for me that my child, grow up with these practices, or that you and I have a beautiful, warm relationship, especially with my kid around. And so you're already painting a very clear picture with a very calm tone prior to the child showing up. You may have someone that will go fully into defensive mode and say, what do you mean? I already do that. And are you blaming me and everything else? Once again, they may not be ready, but you've done your part in sharing what's important for you in the calmest, most clearest way possible. They may also respond and say, okay, like they might be surprised. They may not have much to say. They may need to digest it in their own time. There may be a plethora of different responses. The point is that we can't control how other people are going to respond, but we can certainly control what we put out there energetically when we communicate, how we make someone feel emotionally when we communicate. And the clearer we are about what we want that outcome to look like, and the calmer and more resolved we are in ourselves when we communicate that, the better, or the higher the chance is that we're going to receive that in the end.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Very well said. Very well said. It's like an invitation. I know you're wanting to say something, but I just think you're giving them an invitation versus a list of demands.
Exactly. And we can also choose how much time and energy we want to be in their physical presence. And so that may very well look like, things are fluid, they're smooth. Maybe it was a very positive response from their parents. And so naturally, there's a lighter energy in the dynamic. And so they might want to actually spend more time with each other moving forwards. And maybe it will take them a little bit more time to get there. And maybe they were fully defensive in their response. And that's not me saying on your part or on your part of their friend that they should shut down and close off. It's just, another data point, another piece of awareness that says, okay, maybe rather than bringing my kids around to grandma and grandpa once a week, maybe it'll be bi-weekly, or maybe instead of a couple days a week, it'll just be once a week. So you get to also choose, how much energy and time and attention you want to give to that relationship as well. Not with a sense of coldness, not with a bitterness, not with a shutting down, not with an avoidance. I'm not suggesting any of that. I'm just saying, we can be very clear of whether someone energizes us, makes us feel more expansive, or whether someone drains us and makes us feel more contractive. And based on that data, then we choose whether we want to lean more into the relationships, give more time to the relationships that make us feel more expansive, and perhaps give a little less time to the ones that drain us. And simply of that nature.
Very well said.
Thank you. I'm sort of like internally thinking if I want to share a personal story as well, just because I find sometimes stories make someone that much more real. But I myself, for many years, did not speak to my father. And I decided to open up those doors of communication again when I was in a good place within myself. And so I think we need to recognize we need to do our own work. And we need to recognize when we are capable of having these conversations that offer us a sense of peace, and where we can, regardless of whatever the external response is going to be, we can be at a place of peace and emotionally stable within ourselves. And so whether that looks like doing, physical exercise or meditations daily, breath works, journaling, different types of practices to stabilize our emotional state, that way you can show up in that really calm place for the conversation. And so when I personally felt that I was in that place, then I opened up the conversation. And the conversation was the best conversation, the best outcome that it could have been, and very receptive on both my father's part and, very resolving on my part. But
Yeah.
I came with that energy. And even my father had said, he's like, this is a very different energy than many years ago.
Mm.
So people can feel this, even if they're not doing the work on themselves, they can feel that you're showing up very differently. So, and then from there, based on that, we choose what would we like that relationship to look like moving forwards.
Mm. First off, congratulations on mending that relationship with your dad. And I think that's so beautiful that when you do take care of yourself, when you heal, I'm Southern, so I get hill, and everything mixed up. But when you do take care of yourself, it does change the dynamic of that relationship, because you don't need anything.
Mm-hmm.
There's no needing, there's giving. You're
Mm-hmm.
giving. And when you give, most people are willing to receive.
Yeah.
But when you go into a conversation needing to prove, needing them to agree, needing them to change,
Mm-hmm.
people don't like it when you take from them.
And there's sort of that feeling behind the conversation of like, and almost like I'm waiting or I'm expecting,
Right.
like,
Yeah, there's so many expectation. I mean, you said it, expecting. You are expecting things, and if it doesn't meet those expectations, goes back to attachment. You're attached to the expectations, aka the outcome, which could lead to more resentment and hostility and frustration, because that attachment is coming from unhealed wounds.
certainly,
Yeah.
certainly. And I love that we've moved into expectations. I don't remember if we really touched on this so much in our first round of things, but I think often, in modern day psychology and personal development space, people talk a lot about expectations. Don't have them. Don't be attached to anything. Don't expect anything. And I would actually arguably say that's not quite the case. Our expectations at a core, if we really break them down, actually come from our values. And if we really understand ourselves and we really understand what's important for us and what we value, then we would understand why we expect certain things. In other words, I may expect you to, if you were my partner, I may expect you to call me every day, because at the core, I value connection. And connection for me is a phone call every day. So some people could say, oh, this is, demanding too much and it's too needy and it's too possessive. Some people might say that. Some people would say this is completely normal. Of course, once again, everybody has different filters. But if you understand what's below that expectation and now you communicate, for me, what's important with my partners to feel connected to you. And connection for me means being on a call with you maybe an hour a day. Does that feel good for you? Does that also feel like connection for you? Does that feel realistic for you? Does that feel nice for both of us?
I think
Now,
that's the key. I think that's the key. You're not attached to the outcome.
exactly.
You are setting up boundaries,
Yeah,
safeties, like you said, values. You're creating your world, so to speak, your reality based on that. I think the problem is when we suck people that are not in that inner circle, that haven't given that same approval. Now I'm expecting a stranger to believe what I believe. I'm expecting a stranger to thank me when I open the door, because that's the way I see reality. I value that, but I can't expect other people to value that. Right. And so context is critical. Yeah.
certainly, which is why I love to give examples. You love metaphors. I love examples because I'm like, it really needs to be concrete and deeply understood. And speaking to what you said about, maybe you would have the expectation if you open the door that someone would say thank you, and not everybody operates that way. Just an example. I, once again, am a very big believer in planting seeds. And I also believe that we have so many blind spots as humans until someone makes us aware of certain things. And so for me to assume, that it's polite to say thank you opening a door would disappoint me. So let's say I'm the person opening the door, but I'm expecting a thank you, because I'm assuming that you would know that that's common courtesy. But if instead I were to plant a seed, and that might be an interesting situation because maybe you walk past and we don't really have an opportunity to communicate. But if there is the opportunity to communicate, then I often lean into that, where I will share with someone what I think would be a beautiful alternative to a response or a way of acting or being, without it being an attack on them. So, and often I do this in the form of a question, and that could, in the case of a door being held open, I don't think we would necessarily be having a dialogue around this. It would just be like, okay, I send that human being love and let them be off on their way. But if it was someone in my life where perhaps I found myself feeling a certain expectation and I felt that they weren't following through on that, I would then ask them, how would you personally feel if you were in this position? How would you want me to respond? Or what do you think would be a beautiful way of responding to this or communicating in this situation? That way you start getting them to think about the position you're in. So essentially, through a question, you're placing them in your position, and you're gaining insight as to whether they even see the perspective of where you're standing from, for example. I had a friend of mine years ago, just once again to give another example, a friend of mine years ago had said that she went into one of these big department stores, and she felt that the people that were working there were watching her because they thought she was shoplifting, and she thought it was a race thing. She had this experience on multiple different occasions and always chalked it down to it being a race thing. And then she'd have people making what she believed to be certain ignorant comments around her race. And so once again, chalked it down to a race thing. And I asked her, I said, what would you preference? Like, how would you prefer for people to respond, or what should they do instead? And she's like, I hate when people make ignorant comments at me about my race or treat me in a certain way about my race. They should go Google what they should be doing differently, or how they should speak differently, or if they want to know something about my hair or my color or my ethnicity or my traditions, they should go Google it. Don't ask me, that's ignorant. And what I said to her was, how can someone Google something if they're not aware of what they even need to Google? In other words, if you're completely in the dark around a certain concept, if I'm asking you a question that to you might present as completely racist, but to me, it's simply a curiosity, it could be pure ignorance. But for the benefit of the doubt, I'd say, okay, you may not have this awareness. You may have not grown up around Black people. You may not know anything about their culture, their traditions, their background, anything of that nature. Let me teach you. Let me make you that much more aware. And so I think, going full circle back on what I wanted to say, I think being open enough, and this is the, being fully flexible piece, to also make someone that much more conscious of where their blind spots are without judging them.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you.
Yeah, very hard topic.
I hear you. It's this is where there's work that needs to be done from all angles. Yeah. Every person, right? Because I've heard a lot of people say, when it comes to race, it's not my job to educate.
Yes.
And I would imagine that it does get exhausting if you are constantly having to educate people. So from that perspective, I understand the irritation. From the opposite perspective, being a white female, I don't always know what to Google and what is offensive. And even if I took a course on, different cultures, you can't learn everything
Exactly.
about everyone. Because if I learn everything about this race, then is it not racist somewhat to only learn about that race? Shouldn't I learn about this race and that race and this religion and that religion, or this gender or that gender, or this, it extends beyond color, sex, religion. There's diversability. Maybe you're autistic or on the spectrum of autism. There's only so much that we can know and go out and learn. And so this is where I come back to kind of your point. It may be annoying, it may be frustrating, but at the end of the day, if we want people to be more understanding, we have to be understanding of them. And all of us have an area in our lives where we feel like we have to educate someone. It may not be at the same degree,
Yeah.
but we all are educating someone. I might need to educate my husband on what his behaviors, leaving things around the house means to me, what that, and I might have to do it over and over and over again. Or if I have a kid, I might have to do it over and over and over again, or my parents. So it's not just a race or, sex thing.
Yeah.
We're all educated. And so the question is taking on this, what you might say is a burden at some times, worth it? Is it yielding the results that you are hoping for, which is understanding? It's a tricky spot.
Yes. There's so much here to certainly unpack. Definitely. I almost think, Brittany, that we do a huge disservice to ourselves and to other people if we don't offer them a certain level of awareness of our own experience in this life. And while it may feel extremely frustrating, and I'm not by any means suggesting you need to be every human being's therapist,
right?
I do think at the same time that it is so unfortunate to almost have someone come into our space where they could have had that opportunity to learn and just simply let them go back out into the world to now impact somebody else rather than just having learned that lesson in that moment.
Yeah.
And I think our biggest moments, our biggest opportunities for growth are where we are triggered.
I 100% agree.
And when we are triggered, that is actually the beautiful time to say, what's going on inside of me that's creating this? Because there's something here on a deeper level that I need to let go of, that I'm angry about or frustrated about or disappointed about or hurt, that's not serving me. And so if I can really understand that and let go of all of those emotions, how can I show up differently for these people so that they can show up differently for every next person that comes along?
Yeah. Creating that ripple effect.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Beautifully said. I can't believe we are past the hour again.
Okay.
I mean, this is who we are.
Yeah.
This is who we are. But thank you so much for joining me again for part 2. I'm really excited for your book to come out. I don't think we have a solid date on that yet.
The goal is by the end of the year for Christmas.
Okay. So end of the year 2023.
Exactly.
Okay.
This is the goal. and we are moving in that direction and
Awesome.
taking to flow, allowing things to flow creatively out of me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I will put all the links that were provided in part 1
Beautiful.
in this part as well, so that people can go to your site and they can, I believe you have like they can enter their email address and get notified for pre-order for the book. So this has been beautiful. Thank you so much, Giovanna. It's always a pleasure. Always.
Likewise, we have a really nice flow. So thank you.
My
Pleasure,
pleasure.
pleasure for all of you tuning in. And I look forward to connecting with you personally myself. So don't be shy to reach out.
Thank you. Okay, let's see.
I will also